Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Brainbean here again, and today we're going to be taking a look at two flagship keyboards from some of the industry's heaviest hitters. We're going to be looking at the Razer Huntsman Elite against the Corsair K95 Platinum XT. And I'll also link down below my full reviews of each of these keyboards if you want to learn more about them in a little bit more detail once this video is finished. So I just want to mention that there really is no perfect keyboard for one person. So what I'm going to try to do in this video is give you all the information you need to know about both keyboards and kind of put that head to head so that maybe it'll be easier for you to make a decision if you're trying to decide between these two keyboards. With that being said, though, we've got a lot to cover in this one, so let's just jump right into it. Secretlab combines best-in-class materials, a plethora of finish options, and industry-leading comfort to provide the ultimate seating experience. With models for users of all sizes and aesthetic tastes, there's sure to be a chair for any setup. Click the link in the description to find out which chair is right for you. Let's start by looking at the construction and design of both keyboards. The Huntsman Elite has a 104 key layout with a non-standard bottom row and a fingerprint-resistant matte top plate, while the K95 XT has a 110 key layout and it also has a non-standard bottom row. Now this has a brushed aluminum metal backplate, and I would say in terms of construction and feel, both keyboards have a nice and weighty feel to them and are solidly built, and both boards offer up very minimal flex when really laying into them, but I'll give the edge slightly to the K95 here. These keyboards have a lot in common, but when we look at the aesthetics, there's certainly some clear differences in their design. The K95 Platinum gives off what I would consider a flagship keyboard vibe from yesteryear, having all the bells and whistles on display. From the light bar to the RGB logo and media keys to extra rows of macro keys, there's just a lot going on here. And it certainly reminds me of when gaming keyboards were all about being huge and flashy monsters with just as many buttons as possible. Now, some people still like this aesthetic, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the Huntsman Elite, on the other hand, takes a more minimalistic approach. There's no logo or branding anywhere on the keyboard, and the actual casing of the board is no bigger than it has to be. Surprisingly though, both keyboards are fairly similar in size despite this, especially when their wrist rests are attached. The Huntsman Elite on its own is slightly smaller at 44.4 centimeters wide by 14 centimeters long, and it's 23 centimeters long with the wrist rest attached, while the XT is 46.5 centimeters wide by 17.3 centimeters long, but it's also 23 centimeters with the wrist rest attached. Before we get too deep into the video, I'd like to compare the features of both boards in a little bit more detail. For starters, both keyboards have large braided USB cables that both end in two USB connectors. The Huntsman Elite has one to power the keyboard and another to power the wrist rest, while the K95 XT has one to power the keyboard and one for the USB pass-through that's located at the back of the board. Now, the Huntsman Elite has the light bar that wraps around the entire keyboard, giving it sort of an underglow effect. Now, this light bar is also on the wrist rest as well, which is why we need the other USB connector to power it. This also means that the Huntsman Elite does not have a USB pass-through. The Elite's wrist rest connects magnetically to the keyboard, and it's a solid enough connection that picking up the keyboard won't have the wrist rest fall off. It talks to the keyboard via a set of pogo pins that are on the front of the keyboard. Now, Razer's mentioned that they could introduce other accessories that would use these pins to connect to the keyboard in the future, although it's been over a year since this keyboard's released, and we haven't seen anything announced that's going to take advantage of this feature. Speaking of wrist rests, both keyboards come with removable wrist rests. The XT's pops on with sort of plastic clips at the front, while the Huntsman's is the magnetic ones like I mentioned. Both are padded and wrapped in a leatherette material, but I'd have to give the edge to Razer in the wrist rest department. It's a little bit longer, so it'll accommodate people with a wider variety of hand sizes, and the leatherette on Razer's wrist rest just feels a little bit nicer on the hands. And on the K95, this design of wrist rest is new for the XT. It's lighter, and in my opinion, it's less nice than the older reversible rubber wrist rest that we got on the original K95. And it kind of felt like it was a bit of a step back from the original wrist rest. One thing the K95 XT has that the Huntsman Elite does not is the inclusion of 6 dedicated macro keys on the left side of the keyboard. The MMO player in me still likes the idea of having some dedicated macro keys, but that idea certainly is more polarizing than it used to be with the growing popularity of minimalistic keyboards. Now, the big new feature with the XT is the integration with the Elgato Stream Deck and being able to use those keys to control it. But I don't really think this is that amazing of an addition, as I've heard they're patching all their older boards with the same technology anyways, so really it's more of a software update than an actual physical feature on the keyboard. The Huntsman Elite doesn't have any dedicated macro keys, however you can set any key on the keyboard to be a macro, as well as enable a second function on all of Razer's keys with Razer's Hypershift. So essentially you just have to hit 2 keys for a macro on Razer's keyboard, or 1 for Corsair, but I think if you take advantage of these keys in game, there's certainly something to be said for the simplicity of hitting only one single dedicated key. Both keyboards come with RGB enabled media keys, with Corsair's being a little bit more traditional set of 4 media keys with a textured metal volume scroll wheel and a dedicated mute button. While Razer's media keys are also RGB enabled, although they opted for a more minimalistic approach with only 4 buttons and the integrated digital dial for volume control, although it can be bound to other functions as well. And honestly, both of these here are pretty comparable, but I do like how Razer was able to consolidate their media keys to where they only take up a little bit of space above the number pad. The XT does have a bunch of other features though that are worth mentioning, like the inclusion of the 3 dedicated buttons on the left side of the keyboard. There's one for switching one of the 5 onboard profiles, one for changing the brightness settings, and one to enable a Windows lock mode. Now these are pretty handy to have as dedicated features, but they're also not necessarily something that I couldn't live without with just a simple combination of function keys that could easily take their place. The XT also gives you 3 sets of textured keycaps and a keycap puller, and Corsair gives you a set of WASD, QWERDF, and you get a set of 6 blue keys to replace the already existing textured macro keys on the left side of the board. And I guess this is more to just tie in with the Stream Deck aesthetic, but other than the color change, there's really no difference. The underside of the XT also has the cable channel returning from the original K95 Platinum, and this is for running something like a headset under the keyboard so it can be plugged into that pass-through port and not get in the way. Both boards can be had in a couple of different switch options. The K95 Platinum XT uses Cherry MX switches, and it's available in Cherry MX Brown, Cherry MX Blue, or Speed switches, which is nice because there's one for every major switch type: clicky, tactile, or linear. Razer has their opto-mechanical switches in the Huntsman Elite, which you can get in either the clicky purple switch or the linear red switch. Now, switches largely come down to personal preference, and I could make an argument for each board in terms of their switch type. For example, Razer doesn't offer a tactile option, so if that's more your thing, well, Corsair's got you covered there. But on the other hand, the optomechanical switches feel really good. They're more stable and they have better tuned stats for gaming, with the exception of the Cherry Speed switches, which are almost the same stats as the Razer Red optical switches. Where we also notice a big difference is the stabilizers. The plate-mounted stabs on the XT are pretty rattly, especially in the spacebar, which has been a big problem for them in the past. Razer's stock stabilizers, on the other hand, are actually pretty good, and they sound much better out of the box than Corsair's do, which you're going to hear on this sound test here in just a second. And to keep this sound test as comparable as possible, I'm going to be typing on an XT with Cherry Speeds and a Huntsman Elite with linear reds. So let's go ahead and take a listen. Looking at the keycaps, this is an area where the XT does have an edge. The XT comes with double-shot PBT keycaps, which is a nice value add over the ABS caps of the Huntsman. Now, it is worth mentioning that the Huntsman Tournament Edition does come with PBT keycaps stock, so I don't know if Razer is going to be more moving to this on all their boards in the future, so depending on when you're watching this video, this may or may not have changed. But in terms of Corsair's value, I would say right now this is about a $50 increase on this board, because Corsair's boards have their own non-standard layout, and the easiest way to get PBT keycaps for their keyboards is to buy their own PBT Keycap Set, which costs about $50. Now, the font on these keyboards is a bit polarizing though, as I'd say the majority of people aren't very crazy about it. The big bold lettering does allow for more light to shine through, however, even though it is a PBT keycap, which does make it look a little bit more muted. Razer's keycaps have a nice, clean, minimalistic font to them, but again, they are made out of ABS plastic and they will get kind of shiny over time. Compared to the PBT Keycap Set and the XT, they do have a little bit more vibrant, bright shine to them. However, if you were to get one of Razer's PBT Keycap Sets after the fact and upgrade your Huntsman, you will notice the same muted tones on them like the Corsair keycaps. And I'll be sure to link my review of the Razer PBT Keycaps down below if you guys want to learn more about them. Looking at the lighting on both keyboards, they both bring with them a ton of RGB options. Both keyboards have full per key RGB lighting, and the K95 XT has the 19-zone light bar at the top of the board, a 2-zone RGB-enabled logo, and RGB-enabled media keys for a total of 136 unique lighting zones. The Huntsman Elite also has RGB-enabled media keys, a 38-zone light bar that wraps around the entire keyboard, as well as a 24-zone light bar that wraps around the wrist rest, resulting in a whopping 168 unique lighting zones on the Huntsman Elite. Now, both keyboards have their own look when it comes to the lighting, and I think a lot of the appeal here is going to come down to personal preference. Corsair's larger font and bolder look is a little bit more in your face, while in a more surprising turn of events, Razer's actually more toned down and minimalistic in this case. The lighting software on these keyboards is fairly comparable in terms of function, although IQ is probably more powerful in terms of customizability, but it's also a little bit less user-friendly perhaps. While Razer Synapse is pretty easy to figure out, but it isn't without its fair share of issues here and there. Both will allow you to create custom macros and set your lights with a variety of presets and custom effects. They also both have their own in-game integration. Some examples of games that will work with IQ are Blair Witch, Metro Exodus, Division 2, and Far Cry 5, while Razer has Overwatch, Apex Legends, Fortnite, Doom, Warframe, and a slew of other games. And I think Razer definitely has the edge in terms of the in-game integration department. Both of these keyboards come in at a hefty price point of $200, and both of these keyboards have a lot of great features and extras. And I want to stress to you guys that you should always go with the keyboard that appeals to you most, and don't let somebody like me on the internet tell you which keyboard is perfect for you personally. Maybe you like tactile switches, and in that case the Huntsman Elite really isn't going to be your thing, or maybe you want a cleaner looking board than the busy looking XT, so that might not be the right choice for you. Since this video is only about comparing these two specific keyboards, I would recommend going with the Huntsman Elite over the K95 XT, mainly because for me personally, I just can't get past the horribly rattly stabilizers out of the box. Now, you can mod them with some dielectric grease and the Band-Aid mod and take it apart and do all that kind of stuff, but out of the box, I just think Razer's board here is much more innovative with the optical switches, the nicer stabilizers, the cleaner aesthetic, and really the XT isn't that much of an upgrade from the original K95 Platinum. But if you guys want to learn more about either of these keyboards, I'm going to have my dedicated reviews linked down in the description for you so you can get the more nitty-gritty review right there. Well, that's it for the comparison, guys. Let me know in those comments down below which one of these keyboards is your favorite out of the two. And of course, if you're new here on the channel, be sure to hit that sub button and ring that bell so you don't miss out on more uploads from me. I'm also doing my 50,000 sub giveaway right now. I'll have a link to that video also down in the description. Make sure you don't miss out on that. I'm giving away 2 sets of peripherals from Corsair as well as a Secret Lab gaming chair of your choice. So you really want to make sure you enter that one because it's a really good giveaway. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.